despite all of the attempts and the spin and the excuses, it just became clear to everyone, and finally to President Biden, that it was time for him to exit stage right, and he did the right thing by doing so.
Let's go to American politics first, though. The cliche is that all political careers end in failure, and Joe Biden is heading in very public failure after his hopes to remain as president were ripped away from him. But in his farewell speech to the Democrats' National Convention, he had a long and successful career to reflect on. That's kind of standard Biden shtick, that line then. He did mention being too old. I think that's the first time he's used the phrase too old.
I mean, it was probably written with like a twinkly Joe in mind, but it wasn't delivered with a twinkle particularly. I think there's probably quite a lot of hurt there.
And what did you make of it? Was it him gracefully ceding the stage to Kamala to go off and beat Trump? Was there enough of that, or was there always going to be a bit of, hang on a second, I was a pretty good politician once?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of defending his 3.5-year legacy, and that's not a lot, you know, and I mean, I was surprised actually there wasn't more about his time as vice president, because that's where a lot of, particularly Democrats, have their sort of abiding love for him for. That's where a lot of the well of emotion comes from, is actually the 8 years he did with Obama, then that 4-year break, but rather than the 3-4 years. So I think in terms of the room, two things happened at the same time. People were very generous in their warmth to him, but he didn't change any minds that it was right that he was going.
Yeah, he could have stolen the scene from the show from Kamala, and he didn't really do it.
I'm not sure he could have stolen the scene from Kamala, actually. I don't think he's got the capability anymore.
Well, and that's why they got rid of him ultimately. Well, let's talk to Brett Bruen. He worked in the White House when he was President Obama's Director of Global Engagement, so he was there during the Obama years. Brett, good morning to you.
A very good morning to you.
What did you make of Biden, what he wanted to do, and what he ended up doing in the speech? How did you judge it?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The speech, just like his effort to stay in the presidency another term, went on too long. Yeah. But ultimately, we got to the right place. And that is to say, the speech, you know, with that line about how he gave America his best, truly, I think, bookended his time, 5 decades in public life. And yet at the same time, you know, one of the things watching the speech that I felt is a sense of relief that he was not, in fact, delivering the acceptance speech for the nomination.
Do you think he would have looked at that room? Because I think that's a very fair point, Brett. Do you think he'd have looked at that room, though, with everyone cheering him? And was there a bit of anger, a flash of bitterness that, hang on a second, you know, I should be here for the next 4 years?
Look, I traveled with Vice President Biden, sat in the Situation Room with him. He's a stubborn guy, and I think we saw that stubbornness on full display over the summer. And yet, you know, it became abundantly clear to him after, you know, those polls came in and showed him traveling Trump by 10, 15 percentage points in key states. There was just no mathematical way for him to stay. And despite all of the attempts and the spin and the excuses, it just became clear to everyone, and finally to President Biden, that it was time for him to exit stage right. And he did the right thing by doing so.
We're just talking with Ruth there about whether anyone in that room would have looked at him there and thought we made the wrong decision. Did this do Kamala a service, do you think, in the end, that actually it shows why you had to change? And no one's going to be thinking we made the wrong decision here.
No, I think the polls actually come in at about 4% of Democrats believe that it was wrong for Biden to withdraw. It's, you know, almost universal agreement that he was not our best candidate. And ultimately last night, it was about defining his legacy. As a transition president, he almost physically gave Vice President Harris the baton as she came out on the stage to thank him. I mean, this was a moment of transformation from the old guard generation of Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, now to the next generation of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and a whole host of others that you're going to see speak this evening, not least of which from last evening was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, who gave a quite rousing address to the convention.
And what does this mean for Kamala Harris? Because obviously it's a convention, so everyone's cheering. It happened with the Republican convention. You get momentum from it. She's had a pretty good start, but she's had a pretty easy ride. Is that fair to say? She's had 3 or 4 weeks of everyone saying, well, at least you're not the old guy, Biden. And then people saying, well, at least you're not the old guy, Trump. She's not done any one-on-one interviews. She's not done the debates yet. Are things going well? But there's presumably no one could say she's necessarily sealed the deal yet.
Well, let me work backwards from those points. The first on the debates, Harris is a good debater. You need only look at her performance against Joe Biden in the primary debates back in 2020. She delivered some of the strongest lines against Biden. Similarly, when she was a senator up on Capitol Hill, she was able to eviscerate some of the Supreme Court nominees like Brett Kavanaugh. I think, when it comes to criticisms, there are some legitimate ones on the lack of substance in her policy proposals, but that's coming. I mean, let's give her a break. She was not planning to run for president up until a few weeks ago. And I think she and her team are working on defining beyond just, some of the gimmicks that we heard last week on the economic front, what is going to be her doctrine on the economy, her doctrine on foreign policy, and a whole host of other issues.
How lefty is she? I mean, that's an interesting question for people who don't know her in this country, because she's relatively new, as you say, as a presidential candidate. Is her platform going to be an AOC style, pretty left-wing, woke in the terminology, or is she going to be trying to be as centrist as possible because she's going to want people who are frustrated with the personality of Trump to want to vote for her?
It's interesting because Trump is certainly trying to define her as communist Kamala. And, there have been these attempts by the MAGA wing of the Republican Party to say how extreme she is. In reality, she is about as centrist as Democrats get. She was a prosecutor in San Francisco. She was attorney general in California and a pretty moderate senator from California. So her policies do not jibe with that image that's being evoked from the Republican side of the aisle. And I think you're seeing it in some key ways, including her position on the economy and business. She's already given signals that she will be more pro-business than Biden was, less on some of the attacks against mergers of companies, less in terms of some of the attacks on companies and their efforts to try and grow the economy. So I would expect from Kamala a pretty centrist policy, and for her to add to her administration those from the center. In fact, one of the smartest things I think she can do is nominate Republicans to some of those key cabinet positions so that she tells voters, and it'd be great if she announced it even before November, these are the folks who are going to help me govern.
That's really interesting. Well, she's got to now set a stall out. It's easy when you get the applause and then the hard work follows until November. Brett, really good to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure thing.
That's Brett Bruen there. He worked in the White House where he was President Obama's Director of Global Engagement.